And now we'll begin our debate, and we'll start with Malcolm Gladwell.
Thank you, Andrew. And thanks to all of you for coming out this afternoon. I'm delighted to be here back on my home campus and to look out on all these sunny Canadian faces. In case you're wondering, this is not the first time that Adam and I have debated. We've made a kind of habit of it. And the first time we debated was, I think, 10 years ago on the subject of Canadian healthcare. And I was anti the Canadian healthcare system and Adam was pro. And then 8 years later, after that, I actually switched sides. A fact of which Adam was, I think, justifiably proud. But there's a lesson in that, and that is that Adam's arguments are very effective, but they work very, very slowly. So you may leave today convinced by what I tell you, but be forewarned, at some point in the distant future, perhaps 2016, you will wake up and all of a sudden Adam's arguments will start to make sense.
True enough.
I want to talk about what it means to be small, because after all, it is Canada's size that's the occasion for this debate. We wouldn't be having this debate if Canada was a country of 200 million people, right? I mean, India does not have why India debates. France does not have why France debates. America doesn't have why America debates, although, to be fair, other countries have why America debates. Canadians are insecure about their country. We think we're sort of trivial and marginal, and we think that the enterprise of being a nation is somehow quixotic. And that's all because of our size. And what I want to argue is that our size is not, in fact, the problem. Our size is, in fact, the solution. And when I told this to Adam, I gave him a one-sentence preview of my argument, and he said, "Oh, you're going to make this small, this beautiful argument." That's not actually quite true, because I don't think that aesthetic values attach themselves to size. What I really want to make is the argument that small is powerful, or perhaps more accurately, small is useful. Now, this is something that, in a slightly different context, anthropologists and sociologists have thought about a lot. And so I thought I would begin by drawing on an example that may seem a little bit far-fetched, but trust me, I will circle around and make it make sense. And that is to talk about the example of the success of ethnic Chinese immigrants throughout the world. Now, those of you who are familiar with my writing will know that this practice of talking about X by discussing Y is my only rhetorical move. Chinese immigrants are incredibly successful wherever they go, throughout the Far East, the West Indies, in North America, right? And as a result, all kinds of people have asked the obvious question, which is why? What is it about Chinese that allows them to be so successful, particularly in the commercial realm? And there's all kinds of arguments. There are some who say, well, they're just smarter than the rest of us. There are some that say that they possess some kind of particular entrepreneurial gene. There are others who say that their mothers are particularly ambitious for their children, which is the argument that always strikes me as odd, because it assumes that there are mothers out there who are not ambitious for their children. But the best of all of the arguments, the most, I think, powerful, is the one that says that Chinese are successful not because of any traits that are inherent to being Chinese, but because of the particular position that Chinese immigrants occupy in the societies that they move to. Chinese immigrants, when they move to these other countries, are outsiders and they are minorities. And both those things, which we normally think of as being disadvantages when it comes to making your way in the world, are in fact enormous advantages. So, for example, if you are trying to succeed with a small business, there is a big advantage to being in an area where you don't have a lot of friends and family. Now, that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it's true. Why? Because having an large extended family and lots of friends around creates an enormous burden. You all of a sudden have all these people who want discounts on the things that they buy at your store, who want free things, who want to get a job for their sister-in-law, who want to do, and on and on and on. And all those burdens start to mount up, and all of a sudden, you've got a significant impediment to turning a profit. There's some really wonderful anthropology by Clifford Geertz in Bali, and he compares Balinese and Chinese businesses, people who are doing the same thing. And he points out that in the Balinese business, you've got endless numbers of workers, sitting around in the backyard, people in the front, people, drivers, vice presidents. And in the equivalent Chinese immigrant business, you've got 3 people, a father, a mother, and a 10-year-old boy. Right? Now, which of those two businesses do you think turns a profit? The Chinese does, right? Because they are unencumbered in a way that is enormously useful when it comes to succeeding in a hostile environment. The other thing that being unencumbered allows you to be is mean. Now, being mean is actually really important if you're trying to run a small business, because the thing that is most deadly to the success of small businesses is the inability to collect debts, right? People owe you money, and it's very difficult to make them pay you that money, right? And businesses that can't do that effectively fail. Now, that problem of getting people to pay up is profoundly difficult when you are deeply rooted in a community. If I'm a Gladwell living in a town called Gladwell, which is filled with lots of Gladwells, and in a part of Ontario which is full of all of my second and third and fourth cousin Gladwells, if I want to get my second cousin, Mildred Gladwell, to pay up, I create a major social incident in the land of Gladwells, right? I mean, it's actually quite hard for me to confront her and say, you're a deadbeat. But if you're not a Gladwell and you live in the town of Gladwells, it's actually really easy for you to be mean. And there's some lovely anthropological work that looks at, in Malaysia, Chinese immigrants in Malaysia. And there was one study of a Chinese small businessman who had extended credit to farmers, to Malaysian farmers. And they pointed out that for most of the year, the Chinese businessman behaved like someone who was Malaysian. He dressed like a Malaysian. He spoke in the kind of quiet, respectful tones of a Malaysian. He operated as a Malaysian in that context until harvest time, when he went out to the fields to collect his debts, and all of a sudden, he was Chinese. Right? He dressed differently, he spoke differently, and as the line from the anthropologist was that this behavior, this Chinese behavior, was to ensure that he would not be treated like a fellow Malay who might be expected to be more generous on price or credit terms. He was able, in other words, to occupy this position, this identity as the outsider to his benefit. Right? Very important. Now, the third thing about being unencumbered is that paradoxically, it forces you to be connected. Now think about the Chinese immigrant. There he is in a strange land. He doesn't know anyone in his immediate community. Who does he know? He knows other Chinese immigrants in other parts of that country. Right? So if you look, for example, at very successful Chinese businessmen in the Philippines, one of the reasons they're so successful is that the Chinese businesses that are in some of the smaller regional towns around and cities around the Philippines have got ties to Manila. And that allows them to get access to all kinds of favorable information, favorable terms on shipments coming in, all kinds of things that their competitor businessman, whose world is entirely described by that hometown, never has. Right? Without having, as a sociologist would say, without having strong local ties, you are forced to develop weak regional ties. And that is an enormous advantage. Now, put all those three things together, being unencumbered, having the ability to be mean, and being forced to be connected, and you have a beautiful illustration, description, explanation of why it is the Chinese are so successful. And it has nothing to do with anything inherent to their Chineseness. Now, it should be obvious to you why I've been going on about immigrant Chinese for so long, and that is that I think the position of immigrant Chinese in these various cultures is precisely analogous to the position of Canada on the world stage today. We are the immigrant outsider, right? But that is not a disadvantage. It is an advantage in precisely the same way it is for those immigrant Chinese.